In every community, workplace, and family circle, there exists a particular type of man who seems to glide through existence with an almost supernatural ability to avoid life's weightier responsibilities. He possesses an undeniable charm that opens doors and hearts alike. Yet, beneath this magnetic exterior lies a profound reluctance to fully engage with the demands of authentic adulthood. This phenomenon, clinically recognized as Peter Pan syndrome, represents far more than simple immaturity. It embodies a complex psychological pattern that can devastate not only the individual, but everyone within his orbit. The man afflicted with this syndrome operates in a perpetual state of emotional adolescence, where immediate gratification consistently trumps long-term commitment, where spontaneity masquerades as freedom, and where the avoidance of difficult conversations becomes an art form. He might be the colleague who consistently arrives late to meetings, yet somehow manages to deflect criticism with humor and charisma. Perhaps he is the friend who enthusiastically makes plans, but rarely follows through, leaving others to manage the practical details while he floats effortlessly to the next adventure. Most tragically, he could be the father who remains physically present, but emotionally elusive, offering his children playfulness without the steady foundation of reliability they desperately need. This behavioral pattern extends far beyond occasional irresponsibility or youthful exuberance. It represents a fundamental disconnection from the core principles that define mature masculinity: the willingness to shoulder burdens, the courage to face uncomfortable truths, and the commitment to building something meaningful that extends beyond personal pleasure. The Peter Pan man lives in a carefully constructed bubble where consequences seem perpetually delayed, where serious conversations can always be postponed, and where the weight of genuine responsibility never quite settles on his shoulders. What makes this syndrome particularly insidious is its deceptive nature. Unlike more obvious forms of dysfunction, Peter Pan syndrome often presents itself wrapped in appealing qualities. These men frequently possess genuine warmth, creativity, and an infectious enthusiasm for life that draws people toward them. They excel at making others laugh, at finding novel solutions to problems, and at maintaining an optimistic outlook, even in challenging circumstances. Their natural charisma can make them excellent salespeople, entertaining companions, and initially attractive romantic partners. However, this surface appeal masks a deeper inability to engage with life's inevitable difficulties in a mature and constructive manner. The psychological roots of this condition often trace back to formative experiences that either failed to provide adequate models of healthy masculinity or actively discouraged the development of emotional resilience. Some men who exhibit Peter Pan syndrome grew up with fathers who were physically or emotionally absent, leaving them without clear examples of how to navigate the transition from boyhood to manhood. Others experienced overprotective parenting that shielded them from natural consequences and prevented them from developing the internal resources necessary to handle adversity independently. In many cases, these men learned early in life that charm and humor could serve as effective shields against criticism, responsibility, and emotional pain. They discovered that by maintaining a light-hearted, carefree demeanor, they could often avoid the more challenging aspects of human interaction while still receiving positive attention and social acceptance. Over time, this defensive strategy became so deeply ingrained that it transformed from a conscious choice into an unconscious pattern of behavior. The modern cultural landscape has inadvertently created conditions that enable and even celebrate this type of extended adolescence. Our society's emphasis on youth, novelty, and instant gratification provides numerous opportunities for men to avoid the traditional markers of maturity without facing immediate social consequences. The rise of digital entertainment, social media, and consumer culture has created endless avenues for distraction and escapism, making it easier than ever to postpone serious engagement with life's fundamental questions and responsibilities. Furthermore, changing social expectations around masculinity have created confusion about what it truly means to be a man in contemporary society. While previous generations had clearer, albeit sometimes restrictive, definitions of male roles and responsibilities, modern men often find themselves navigating ambiguous territory without clear guideposts. This uncertainty can make the safety of perpetual boyhood seem more appealing than the risk of stepping into an undefined version of manhood. The neurobiological aspects of this condition also deserve consideration. Research in developmental psychology has shown that the human brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex responsible for executive function and long-term planning, continues developing well into the mid-20s. However, emotional maturity requires more than biological development. It demands active engagement with challenging experiences that promote growth and self-awareness. Men who consistently avoid such experiences may find their emotional development stunted, regardless of their chronological age or intellectual capabilities. The impact of Peter Pan syndrome extends far beyond the individual, creating ripple effects that touch every relationship and responsibility in the man's life. Romantic partners often find themselves assuming the role of both lover and parent, managing not only their own emotional needs, but also compensating for their partner's inability to engage fully with adult responsibilities. These relationships frequently become characterized by an exhausting dynamic, where one person carries the emotional and practical weight, while the other remains perpetually on the periphery of genuine commitment. Children of men with Peter Pan syndrome face particularly complex challenges. While they may enjoy having a father who seems more like a fun older brother, they often struggle with the absence of consistent boundaries, reliable guidance, and emotional security that comes from having a truly mature parent. These children may learn to see adult responsibility as optional rather than essential, potentially perpetuating the cycle into the next generation. Professional relationships also suffer under the weight of this syndrome. Colleagues and supervisors may initially appreciate the creativity and enthusiasm that Peter Pan men bring to their work, but over time, the pattern of unreliability, avoidance of difficult tasks, and resistance to feedback becomes increasingly problematic. Career advancement often stagnates because true professional growth requires the ability to handle criticism, learn from mistakes, and take on progressively greater responsibilities, all areas where these men typically struggle. The financial implications of this syndrome can be particularly devastating. Men who avoid adult responsibilities often struggle with basic financial management, from paying bills on time to planning for long-term goals like retirement or homeownership. Their tendency to prioritize immediate pleasure over future security can lead to chronic financial instability that affects not only their own lives, but also the lives of anyone who depends on them. Perhaps most tragically, the Peter Pan man himself often experiences a profound sense of emptiness and confusion as he ages. While his external circumstances may appear enviable, freedom from heavy responsibilities, maintained youthful energy, and continued social popularity, internally he may struggle with feelings of purposelessness and disconnection. The very strategies that once protected him from pain begin to prevent him from accessing the deeper satisfactions that come with meaningful achievement, genuine intimacy, and the quiet pride of having built something lasting. The path toward overcoming Peter Pan syndrome requires a fundamental shift in perspective about what constitutes freedom and fulfillment. True liberation comes not from avoiding responsibility, but from developing the capacity to handle it with grace and competence. The man who learns to embrace challenge, to sit with discomfort, and to persist through difficulty discovers a form of freedom that the eternal boy can never access. The freedom that comes from genuine capability and self-respect. This transformation typically begins with honest self-examination, a process that requires considerable courage for someone who has spent years avoiding uncomfortable truths. The man must learn to observe his own patterns without immediately deflecting through humor or distraction. He must ask himself difficult questions about the real impact of his choices on himself and others, and he must be willing to sit with the discomfort that such honest assessment inevitably brings. Developing emotional resilience becomes a crucial component of this growth process. Rather than viewing difficult emotions as problems to be avoided, the maturing man learns to see them as sources of information and opportunities for development. Grief teaches him about the value of what he has lost. Fear shows him what matters enough to feel vulnerable about. Anger reveals his boundaries and values. Shame, when processed healthily, motivates him toward better choices and behaviors. The cultivation of discipline represents another essential element of maturation. This doesn't mean becoming rigid or joyless, but rather developing the ability to choose long-term benefits over immediate gratification when circumstances require it. The man learns to keep commitments, even when he doesn't feel like it, to have difficult conversations, even when avoidance seems easier, and to persist with challenging tasks, even when his initial enthusiasm wanes. Building genuine relationships becomes both a motivation for and a result of this growth process. As the man develops greater emotional capacity and reliability, he discovers that his connections with others deepen and become more satisfying. He learns that vulnerability, rather than being a weakness to be avoided, is actually the gateway to authentic intimacy and meaningful connection. The development of a sense of purpose beyond personal pleasure provides crucial direction for this transformation. Whether through career advancement, creative pursuits, community involvement, or family responsibilities, the maturing man discovers that his greatest satisfaction comes not from what he can avoid, but from what he can contribute. This shift from a consumer mentality to a contributor mentality represents one of the most significant markers of genuine adulthood. Mentorship, both receiving and eventually providing it, plays a vital role in this developmental process. Learning from men who have successfully navigated the transition to mature masculinity provides both practical guidance and inspirational examples. Eventually, as the man develops his own wisdom and capabilities, he discovers the profound satisfaction that comes from helping younger men avoid the pitfalls he once experienced. The journey from Peter Pan syndrome to authentic manhood is neither quick nor easy, and it rarely follows a linear path. There will be setbacks, moments of doubt, and strong temptations to retreat into familiar patterns of avoidance. However, each small step toward greater responsibility and emotional honesty builds momentum and creates positive feedback loops that make continued growth more likely. What emerges from this process is not a grim, joyless version of masculinity, but rather a more complete and satisfying way of being in the world. The mature man retains his capacity for playfulness and spontaneity, while adding depth, reliability, and purpose to his character. He discovers that true freedom comes not from the absence of responsibility, but from the competence to handle responsibility well. The tragedy of Peter Pan syndrome lies not in its inevitability, but in its preventability. With awareness, support, and commitment to growth, any man can learn to embrace the full spectrum of adult experience. The choice between remaining an eternal boy and becoming a mature man is ultimately a choice between a life of surface pleasures and a life of deep meaning, between the illusion of freedom and the reality of genuine autonomy. For every man who recognizes aspects of himself in this description, the question becomes not whether change is possible, it always is, but whether he possesses the courage to begin the difficult but ultimately rewarding journey toward authentic adulthood. The world needs men who are willing to grow up, to take responsibility, and to contribute meaningfully to the lives of others. The time for floating through life on charm alone eventually ends for everyone. The only question is whether that ending will come through conscious choice or inevitable consequence. The path forward requires no special talents or extraordinary circumstances, only the willingness to face truth, embrace discomfort, and commit to the ongoing process of becoming fully human. In making this choice, the man discovers not only his own potential, but also his capacity to positively impact everyone whose life he touches. This, perhaps, represents the ultimate measure of successful manhood. Not the avoidance of responsibility, but the graceful acceptance of it. Not the preservation of boyhood, but the courageous embrace of all that authentic adulthood has to offer.